Hey everyone, welcome back to another exciting episode of This Week in Privacy. This is episode 19 of our weekly series where we cover the latest updates with what we're working on within the Privacy Guides community and this week's top stories in the data privacy and cybersecurity space. If you don't know about who we are, Privacy Guides is a nonprofit that researches and shares privacy-related information, and we have a community on our forum and matrix where people can ask questions and get advice about staying private online and preserving your digital rights. So before we get into all of the topics today, I'll give you a quick rundown of how these shows typically work like normal. We start out by covering site updates, what we're working on behind the scenes, and then we move on to top news stories that we've seen throughout the week in data privacy, cybersecurity, a lot of exciting topics this week, so it should be a good episode. And then we move on to exploring some trending topics that we've seen in our community forum, and we answer any viewer questions that we receive. So if you have a question for us, definitely leave a comment in, you can leave it in the YouTube live chat, you can leave it on the forum thread, which is pinned right now, and we will look at both of those. Um, but I think that kind of covers it. So let's kick this off with what we've been working on. I'll pass this over to Jordan, who's with me today, and they can share a bit about the stuff that they've been working on the video production side of things.
Thanks, Jonah. Yeah, this week's kind of been a planning week, I guess, and also just like making sure we've got other projects rolling. And we've sort of been starting a video on quantum computing because there's been some questions in our community about quantum encryption, post-quantum encryption, and what cryptographic algorithms are secure against quantum computers. So that's kind of the video that I've been working on, just scripting it, recording, getting the like base recording and editing done. And we have that out next week for everyone to check out. So definitely look forward to that. And also, we've been also starting to work on a video about data brokers, and that's sort of a pretty big topic. So we're bringing in an expert on that and to sort of make sure that we've got a um, kind of comprehensive video about it, and just so people are aware of the information that data brokers are collecting on them. And I think that'll also be quite an interesting video. So similar style to the video we recently did about browser fingerprinting, we'll bring in an expert to sort of share their thoughts and opinions. And yeah, it should be a really good video. So do look forward to that. But thanks for introducing me, Jonah.
That all sounds super exciting, Jordan. Thanks for sharing. I'll share a bit about what we've been doing on the web side of things. The biggest thing that I've been working on this last week, I'm sure if you're kind of involved in our community, you've seen posts about this because I've been going pretty hard about it on the forum and social media. But we recently launched a membership program to allow people to support our work more effectively. Of course, at Privacy Guides, we have 3 people who we pay, to work on all of this stuff on a regular basis. Jordan and Kevin here with me today are 2 of them, and then we also have M, who's our staff writer publishing articles, and they have gotten a ton of work done this year. So it's been, kind of a game changer for getting all of this information out there. In just the last 9 months, we've published 15 videos and 41 articles, which is crazy, I think, for such a team. Of course, we've been working on all sorts of updates for our website. We have a ton of volunteers who are working on that. But in terms of getting in front of new people and getting this information out there in a more accessible way, users that are active on our forum and pretty much double the page views that we got compared to last December on our website. So all the work that's been going on so far is really making a difference. And that's why we kind of have this new membership program. And so we have different uh, pricing plans. Basically, you can subscribe monthly or annually. Um, the regular price is going to be about $10 a month, but if you subscribe right now, since we just launched it, there's a discount, so you can get it for $6 a month. And then there's additional discounts if you pay annually. And what you'll get from that is a badge on the forum. You'll get access to some members only content that we will be putting out in the future. And you will, what else will you get? You'll get priority answers to your questions here on this chat. So if you ask a question on the forum, we'll be sure to cover that first before we move on to the other listeners Q&A things. And then you'll also get early access to videos on the channel. How early access is it? It is depends on how early we can get that video out because we do have a publishing schedule, but you'll typically get at least a couple days in advance. Watch that, leave a comment, and get all that new information. That's kind of the basic rundown. It's all very new and exciting for us, and we aren't fully sure like all of the ways that we want to provide benefits to our members, but the main thing that we do want to do is make sure that the value that you're getting for that $10 a month and supporting us is worth it to you. So if you have additional ideas for things that we can do to make this more of a sell for you or that you would find helpful from us, definitely leave a comment in our membership thread. We've gotten a ton of great ideas and we've been talking about it in team chats throughout the week about other things that we can do for members. I think it's just really important that we kind of get to a more sustainable place where we can support the people who are paying to create all this great content on a regular basis, and we can kind of keep the momentum going into next year and beyond. So that kind of sums up the membership stuff. Oh, wow. I don't know if you heard that thunder, but it was really loud on my end. It's raining right now. That's true. Another thing that we're working on is merchandise. I know people have been hounding me for stickers for weeks, and we're gonna have a solution out for that very, very soon. So stay tuned for that. I think beyond that, uh, we've been working on a ton of stuff on our website. I think we're getting ready to publish another release. We published a couple new updates recently. I think the last one was since the last show. But we uh basically updated some information about the Linux listings. We updated some information about Apple Fitness for fitness tracking. We removed Pico Crypt. I don't remember if we touched on that in the last episode or not, but that's no longer maintained. So if you are using that, just be aware of that. The changelog is always on our forum and on GitHub. So if you want to see all of the changes that we've been making, definitely check that out. The other thing that we added is another language option for Taiwanese or well traditional Chinese, but the the variant they read in Taiwan. Um, that has been people have been working hard on that for a while, and we finally got that live. Um, so yeah, a lot of exciting stuff on the website end of things. I think that kind of covers the main updates from my end. So if we don't can't think of anything else, I think we can move on to some of the biggest news stories. I'll pass it off to Kevin here, who's going to introduce the first story that we're going to be talking about this week.
Thank you so much, Jonah. So, of course, we're starting off with probably one of the most scary stories that appear on our show so far, in which there has been a concerning amount of doxing and online harassment towards online critics after the aftermath of Charlie Kirk's assassination. You might have already heard of this in other sources, of course, but a few days ago, Charlie Kirk was assassinated, and there has been a lot of controversial topics spread throughout social media. I want to emphasize that, of course, that covering this, that we, of course, like condemn all political violence. However, we also do want to support freedom of speech, and we want everyone to be careful when discussing these topics. There has been an coordinated online doxing campaign has emerged in the wake of right-wing activist Charlie Kirk's killing, which has been targeting academics, teachers, government employees, and others who posted about it online. So far, by the time this article has been posted, around 15 people have been fired suspended, but you may have heard of additional cases, more severe, of course. The most notable being Jimmy Kimmel quite recently in his late night show by ABC. But so far, of course, like this total has been quite huge and has included journalists as well and teachers. And even on Friday, of course, a junior NASDAQ employee was fired over a post related to Kirk. And of course, all these folks have been subject to torrents of either online abuse or seen their office flooded with calls they may need to be fired, and part of a surge of anger, of course, that followed the killing. And of course, there's been a lot of folks active, be it on social media, mostly influencers, such as Shaya Rajcik, who's on the forefront of this campaign. And there's been one instance where Rajcik has targeted a lecturer at California State University at Monterey Bay, who essentially posted something in their Instagram story, and which led to them being terminated by the university. Now, of course, I just want to keep in mind that despite what happened, of course, uh, posting on private social media is no longer safe nowadays. There has been a website that's been made recently called the Charlie Kirk Data Foundation, which claims to profile and compile publicly available information. However, we don't really know so far if that's necessarily true. In the past, this website received over 60,000 tips from folks who are sending in information about people who claim to be either supporting or incitement to violence or supposedly mocking Charlie Kirk's recent demise. And while we can't confirm for sure whether or not that this website is continually active, what we can know for sure is that nobody is particularly safe, especially when posting on their real identity. So just for my 2 cents here, regardless of your political opinions, make sure to not post sensitive content online, whether private or public, on their real identity. And most importantly, please consider the fact that your digital footprint is permanent and can't be particularly be easily removed. It is unfortunate that such digital harassment is happening nowadays, but of course, there isn't really a lot we can do with it besides advocate it on the national level. And I would love to know if fellow co-hosts have any opinions on this as well, see how people better protect themselves.
Yeah. Thanks for introducing that story, Kevin. I think you make a lot of good points. It's a lot that people I think have to be concerned about, and it kind of ties into a lot of stuff that we've been saying for a while, right? Like having all of this stuff tied to your real identity is problematic for people. I posted about this on the forum a week ago when this was first being reported, basically. And my overarching point is that when it comes to like real name policies on these platforms, it puts people in a dangerous position for sure, and it's something to be concerned about. But I also think that it is kind of a slippery slope towards potential government overreach and more severe consequences than what might happen in your personal or private lives with your employer or whatever. Because being fired is one thing. It probably shouldn't happen over, just expressing speech like this, but at the end of the day, these are private companies and they're generally not obligated to hire people. And so there's only so much that you can do in those situations. And the best defense against, being fired for your speech is to just not publish it under your real name or not publish it at all. But I think it gets taken to the next level, I think, when people start being punished by the government, for their speech, and that was what I was originally concerned about because we've seen such a push from governments all around the world, not just in the US, for, platforms to verify information about their users, like age verification, of course. We see governments who want messengers to scan people's messages to see if there's anything happening that they don't like. There's been a push for real name policies on a lot of different platforms for a long time. That kind of normalizes all of this behavior. And when that stuff becomes normalized, it becomes much easier for websites and governments to ask for more information over time. Like tomorrow, it might be age verification where you're just giving your age to them. But once that system is established, they'll start asking for more information about your ID, like your real name or your photo or other identifying attributes. And it becomes harder to opt out of this as it becomes more normalized. And that was kind of my general prediction with this post when we were talking about it in the community. We've had a lot of great discussions on the forum about this whole thing, and it's been, I don't say surprisingly because I think our community is great, but it's been very civil, which is good. And I think that we've gotten a lot of stuff um, talked about, and there's a lot more stuff to talk about. I know people are still actively discussing this on our forum and on Matrix. Uh, I think what has happened recently, with like Jimmy Kimmel, for example, as Kevin just mentioned, is we've seen this kind of accelerate a bit faster than even I predicted, where, now the government is actively threatening people, and we've stepped beyond, just businesses, into the point where government agencies and government officials are kind of coercing these businesses to fire people. It's not being made like of their own choice, basically. We've seen the FCC threaten these broadcast networks basically to have the show taken down, if or they'll face consequences if they don't comply. And that's the situation where now, when the government is kind of putting their thumb on the scale when it comes to this whole free speech thing, now we are getting into real um, freedom of speech violations, and this is a big problem. And so yeah, it's exactly the thing that I was talking about, and if it's happening to celebrities like Jimmy Kimmel today, there's really nothing stopping this from happening to everyday people, in their everyday lives who are maybe less notable. But because the government is also pushing for, these ties to your ID through age verification and other measures on social media, that just gives them a lot more power over what you can say and do, and they can be very threatening to you or to your employer based on what you say, um, which is dangerous. So I think it's just a dangerous situation for the US to be in, and I think it's a huge warning for people in other countries, because this isn't just a problem that's exclusive to the US. We talked about a few weeks ago all this chat control stuff coming out in the EU. Age verification, of course, mainly started in the UK, but it's now being adopted in a lot of different countries. And all of this stuff is going to kind of tie into this system of censorship that's being established right now, and we need to keep an eye out for it. So that was kind of the main point I wanted to make when we were talking about all of this stuff. It kind of goes beyond, this particular situation or the politics of it. And if you look at the bigger picture, like, this is the path that these governments have been laying for a while, and it doesn't have any good outcomes for anyone on either side of either side of the political issues that are so hot these days. I think that kind of covers what I was saying. Jordan, did you have anything to add about any of that?
No, that was an incredible like summary and overview. Yeah, I definitely agree with like all of that. But I think like one thing that I saw you mention in the forum post where you posted this article was more about like decentralized platforms and platforms that aren't like, pushing this sort of real name policy and age verification stuff. Because we do have platforms that are, respecting people's privacy. They're not collecting excessive amounts of information to be able to track people across the internet. So I do think it's important to mention there are platforms where your free speech can be protected, like with like the Fediverse, you can host your own server, and then basically no one can remove you from the internet. Well, I mean, maybe you're like registrar, maybe you're like a hosting provider, but like, there's limits of things, right? Um, but I think it's kind of an interesting thing. I don't think there should be any single entity that decides whether your speech is acceptable or not. And I think that's the main problem with a lot of these centralized platforms. When it relates to free speech, I guess. But that's kind of all I wanted to mention. I agree with all the other stuff you said, though. I think it is kind of concerning, especially I did read in this article that there was people within the government that were basically proposing that people should be deported for criticizing this person. And I think that obviously flies in the face of free speech, especially when it comes to I believe it's First Amendment or Second Amendment. I'm not sure. I'm not American, but like the protections that you have under the you know,
First.
legal framework you have there.
Yeah, yeah. Absolutely. I mean, I think that's a great point about decentralized platforms, and it's definitely something that more people do need to adopt or consider adopting, because it kind of goes to um, the point I was saying about like not letting this be normalized on the internet. Right now, that is the best thing you can do to kind of take a stance against platforms like Facebook that are requiring all of this information. I think we do when we talk about all this legal stuff, we get into potentially murky territory where maybe it'll be illegal in the future to host or to use those platforms. And so it's something that we need to keep an eye on. But I think if we can kind of bring back some of the elements of privacy that were more common on the internet, in the early 2000s, compared to now, where people more often posted under pseudonyms or usernames that didn't have anything to do with their real life identity. Like that is one thing that can help prevent this kind of rampant information sharing from being normalized. So uh, definitely a good direction to go in. Kevin?
Yes, I actually do have one question. So, for folks who do operate under a pseudonym and continue to post, let's say, on a federated service like Mastodon, I was just wondering though, is it still possible for them to be identified otherwise? Let's say by a dedicated investigator or someone who's really passionate about this type of work, as we see, with the whole website being that's dedicated to this. Do you feel like there's any other methods which would be identified indirectly that's not necessarily tied with their like online pseudonym, like for example, like their typing style, or perhaps like any like related like accounts to use for the same email. Like I heard that could be another way in which like an account could be identified.
That is a great question. It does kind of come into a bit of what we always talk about in our communities and on our site about threat modeling, because the like who's looking into you definitely does make a difference, and then whether that information is publicly accessible versus only accessible to the service provider, that makes a difference as well. So if we're talking about maybe your government uh, persecuting you for things that you're saying online, you may have less protections because the service providers might comply with giving them your information, for example. But we would see less of these, like the public kind of organizing against you and trying to uh, cancel you, I guess, in the court of public opinion. Sites like the one that you mentioned, it'd be harder for them to compile. Uh, this information about different people to to kind of call them out for their speech because they wouldn't have access to that insider information uh, that like a federal investigator might have, for example. Um, as far as like other ways to identify people, it does again come down to your risk. There's certainly been like a lot of high profile OPSEC failures about like linking your email between like an account you use on Tor to a ClearNet account. But I think in most cases, when we're talking about something like this and you're not committing like an actual crime, right? Like selling drugs on the dark net or something. I'm thinking about how like the Silk Road guy got caught. If it's just free speech and you're not being like the government isn't going after you right now, and it's mainly just people kind of putting pressure on businesses and governments to go after these people. I think that making a big difference in how your public persona uh is published uh will be a big protection. All of that other stuff is kind of more advanced, like analysis of your typing habits, for example. It's possible, but I think on a large scale, it's not really going to happen. And the main thing that you want to do is um, stop like a ton of people to get caught up in like a mass dragnet. It's a lot easier to defend against mass surveillance and like these broad attacks across the internet versus like targeted attacks. If you're being targeted by somebody specifically, you do have to take advanced measures that we probably won't cover in our general advice. But when it comes to thwarting mass surveillance, it does make a huge difference just even switching to a pseudonym for this stuff and not complying with these real name policies on these different networks.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. Thank you so much for that advice. I think there's definitely a lot of folks out here who have been hearing about this and are incredibly worried. Um, I think on that note, unless anyone else has any other comments or about this article, we can move on to the next one involving Apple and their recent upgrades. I was wondering, Jonah, if you could take this.
Yeah, I can cover this one. So this has been widely reported. This article we're looking at is from thehackernews.com. They say Apple iPhone Air and iPhone 17 feature A19 chips with spyware-resistant memory safety. So I'll just read the intro to this article here. Apple on Tuesday revealed a new security feature called Memory Integrity Enforcement that's built into its newly introduced iPhone models, including iPhone 17 and iPhone Air. Memory integrity enforcement, per Apple, offers always-on memory safety protection across critical attack surfaces, such as the kernel in over 70 user-land processes without sacrificing device performance by designing its A19 and A19 Pro chips, keeping this aspect in mind. So in the company's security blog, um, they say that this new feature is built on their existing secure memory allocators, coupled with a new enhanced memory tagging extension, at eMTE, they call it, in synchronous mode. You might recognize MTE from the Google Pixels, which have had it for a couple years. Google will enable this in selective circumstances, and then Graphene OS notably enables this in the Android kernel and across all apps, I believe, to my knowledge. So MTE, this memory tagging extension, was originally a feature that was developed by ARM that was meant to detect potential memory corruption exploits, and then uh, this new version that Apple is releasing in their chips kind of improves upon that by actively blocking buffer overflows and use after free bugs. They say it takes a step forward in terms of like the security and performance. They didn't want to use the original version of MTE in their phones for whatever reason, but at the end of the day, MTE is something that people on Graphene OS have enjoyed for a while. You also get it enabled on all of your apps on the regular Google stock Android operating system if you're in the advanced data protection program, or advanced protection program. So yeah, too many acronyms. Um, but it's a really important feature. I think that kind of goes underrated in the security space because, well, because it requires hardware support. So it's you can only get it on select devices. But when it comes to thwarting like the malware that we see that affects activists and journalists and lawyers and all these people, like Pegasus, for example, a lot of the time, the way that they get a foothold into your system is by exploiting various chains of exploits, basically. That could be across different apps or across different operating system features. And what this is going to do is just make it much less likely, or much more likely to catch these exploits when they're happening and kind of crash the app before the exploit chain can complete. So it's going to, not, it's not like a magic bullet that's going to stop all exploits in their tracks, but if it can stop enough, and if it can stop that chain of exploits, that will prevent like serious malware from affecting these people. And so if any of that targeted malware is a concern, this is kind of a huge leap forward in the iOS space, compared to previous. And it's good that Apple is kind of beginning to catch up to Graphene OS in this regard. I know that Graphene OS's implementation is a lot more comprehensive because they cover basically everything, whereas Apple is only protecting select components. That's something that I hope to see uh, come to like lockdown mode, for example. It would be nice if lockdown mode enabled eMTE for all of the apps on your device instead of only ones that developers opt into. I think that that would be a huge improvement to that, which I haven't seen them announce yet, but I'm hoping they do. Um, that kind of sums it up. Kevin, have you seen anything about this that you wanted to add?
Oh, yes, yes. I actually just have a question, at least on the status of MTE, like across other Android devices. So I heard that there's a potential chance that this could be implemented across the Snapdragon SoCs, and I was just wondering if like is this potentially like something that could happen in the near future, or do you feel like right now um, eMTE is like probably the most second best way we can have it right now?
It's a good question. So eMTE is like the latest version of MTE that has been released by ARM. Apple is saying that they wrote it with ARM, but it's part of ARM's release, and so it could be adopted by Google in their Tensor chips, and it could be adopted by Qualcomm certainly in their SoCs. Right now, it does mean that uh, the implementation in hardware is a step ahead of anything that you can get on a Pixel at the moment. I expect that'll probably change in future Pixel devices, and of course, again with Graphene OS, you're still getting more robust protection, even though you don't have this newly enhanced MTE, the fourth version of this, just because it does apply the existing MTE on Pixels to more components. But I definitely can see other manufacturers following suit. I haven't heard of any announcements from someone like Samsung or any of the other major Android OEMs right now, but I do think when it comes to especially security features, it's either typically Google or Apple kind of leading the charge in the mobile space, and then, um, especially when Apple does something, I think a lot of people follow. So it wouldn't surprise me if Samsung announced something like this with their knock security, or if we see it in more phones. And I think that that would be a good thing overall. And hopefully, Google's protections that they apply to people in the advanced protection program also apply to different devices. Um, but yeah, I haven't seen any news on that, but it is kind of an open thing in the ARM ecosystem. It's not exclusive to Apple, so it is something that could theoretically happen if more people adopt it.
Yeah, I think this is just kind of like a positive thing to have people have access to basically like, protections that are like automatically enabled that protect against mercenary spyware. Um, but I do think like the level of protection that you already get with like lockdown mode on an iPhone, like it's already quite good. So like I definitely wouldn't go out and buy an iPhone 17 specifically just for this feature, unless you're like, I don't know, like a journalist or someone who might be attacked by mercenary spyware. Um,
Yeah, on that note, I don't know if I would necessarily agree. I mean, lockdown mode is a big step forward, but if you do think you're targeted by this, like the protections that EMTE is giving you are more robust than anything that you can get in lockdown mode right now. Like if you can only choose one or the other, this is actually better than what lockdown mode has been providing people for a while now. And so I think I think that there's probably a future where lockdown mode will incorporate this technology uh, and enable EMTE across more apps, like I was saying before. But honestly, like it really depends on your profession and what you do and how worried you are about this. Lockdown mode in the first place wasn't like super necessary for everyone to use, but if you are like at serious risk of being targeted by this, it might be worthwhile to switch because it is a significant improvement over lockdown mode right now. And I think it's kind of overshadowed by all the other Apple stuff that's been going on. I don't know if I told you, but I went to an Apple store this morning to look at the new phones. And I wasn't that excited about them just from a feature perspective. I'm holding my current iPhone next to them and I'm like there's nothing new. So I actually walked out without getting a new one. But I still might be convinced by this because I think that this is a huge feature for the people who need it, and it will make a difference. And it brings it, one step closer to the level of security that Graphene OS users currently enjoy. And I think it's always good to have more options than just that out there in the world.
yeah, no, that's fair. I agree. But I do think like, for like the average person, this sort of upgrade is not going to be the biggest thing, but like Jonah said, it is kind of important to consider your situation. So if it
Yeah.
is sort of a thing that you would be targeted with, then it's definitely a good idea to upgrade because then you get that extra protection. Um,
I I definitely would say so. I mean, the other thing is the way that this works, it because it was originally built as like a debugger tool, basically. A big advantage of this is that uh, it'll catch things more quickly, and I think it'll help Apple actually catch like when these exploits are happening on somebody's device faster because we know that Apple already sends out like mercenary spyware notifications, for example, if they can detect whether this is happening. And I think that potentially this could help get those notifications out in a speedier fashion than are even happening now, and that could also really dramatically help a lot of journalists and people who are affected by this.
Definitely, and I think, like, the great thing about this, though, is that, like, I see a lot of there's, like, been quite a lot of, people who are very, like, high targets for sort of mercenary spyware, but they didn't actually know about lockdown mode, and they didn't
Hmm.
enable it. But now we're in a position where, like you said, this is quite a significant increase, and now there won't really be, like, there's no toggle. This is just on. Like, as far as we're aware, this is, unless they expand it to lockdown mode as an extra thing, but just having that extra
Yeah.
protection by default is kind of huge, because it's not so it's you know I think a lot of people don't really like lockdown mode because it is quite restrictive in some ways. So getting that protection by default is incredibly important. Yes, Kevin, what do you want to add something here?
Oh yes. I just feel like I think generally speaking, though, like without fully enabling lockdown mode, what someone could do is instead is to try to make sure that, um, for example, if they use something like WhatsApp, iMessage, or Signal to disable link previews, or try to figure out ways to not be added to random groups, for example, because a lot of the threat vector that a lot of the attack vectors that these spyware companies use is that they will add you to a group without your permission, or to use some form of other like way of actually like getting your device infected. So yes, technically lockdown mode is very helpful. It's really easy to like set up, just one button. But it's still entirely possible to like replicate at least some of the effects that lockdown mode gives you by just simply configuring your device settings.
That is a good point. I think like I mean that is a huge attack vector, in reducing your attack surface is definitely the main way to kind of prevent this. We do see like if you enable lockdown mode, Apple will disable link previews in iMessage, for example, but it won't happen in other apps because they don't really have control over what Signal or WhatsApp or whatever shows you. But if you can also kind of replicate some of the things that lockdown mode does in those third-party apps, like you were saying, I do think that that is really good advice.
Definitely. So I think with that being said, we've kind of talked about that for a little while here. We can move on to the next article here, and it is about the Danish Justice Minister. We must break perception of right to private messaging. So I guess if you haven't tuned in here a while, there's kind of a bit of a thing going on in Europe right now, and it's the chat control whole saga is going on, I guess. And basically a lot of countries want to scan people's devices for problematic content, such as like child sexual abuse material and other illegal content. And we're seeing like sort of different governments in the EU come out in support and also against this. So in this case, the Danish justice minister is coming out and saying that people shouldn't have the right to private communications. So I guess I'll just quote exactly what he wrote here. Quote, "We must break with the totally erroneous perception that it's everyone's civil liberty to communicate on encrypted messaging services." So I feel like we don't really have to like say why that's wrong, obviously, because I think people should be allowed to communicate privately and securely using encrypted messaging apps. So I mean, it is Google translated though. Just to be make it clear here, that is Google translated according to this article. So that the wording might not be perfect there, but that is kind of the way that they're saying it. Do you all have any thoughts about this?
Well, yeah, kind of related to that. I think that this is a viewpoint that some people have. They probably have, for example, where like it hasn't historically been the case where you can like send a letter in the mail to someone and not have it be read by the government, for example, or the postal service. That's kind of their argument for, there should be a back door for government in these messengers. Um, what's different about encrypted private messengers, the biggest thing is just the the amount of attackers out there and the people that who can access that letter. Because if you're sending a letter to a person, it's typically it's unless they lose it or something, it's only going to be handled by the post office and delivered directly to them. But, on the internet, all of this information and data going around is being handled by literally countless third-party intermediaries who you never even notice because they pass things along so fast, but they can read all of this stuff. And you're also very susceptible to hackers and cyber attacks and people who want to get into this information. The information that's being shared in messengers and on the internet is by far more valuable and more sensitive than has ever been shared in like letters or other more traditional forms of communications in the past, which is why strong security is so important and it kind of outweighs a lot of these concerns that people have with like how strong that security is. It's just the fact that like to hack somebody you can be anywhere in the world and hack them over the internet, whereas if you want to read somebody's letter you actually have to physically go and find the letter and open it, which is not impossible, especially for law enforcement, and you can argue that law enforcement should be able to read those messages. I won't you know the reality is, like, even if you do believe that that is the case, there is no way to do it securely. And so we can't give up, like, this fundamental, um, security feature and let cyber criminals and hackers run rampant with everyone's information just to kinda uphold these traditional values when it comes to, like, law enforcement. It's a whole different ballgame here when there's no effort to hack anyone whatsoever compared to before. So I think, yeah, like you said, it kind of goes without saying, but I also just wanted to say it because people, I mean, there are people out there who do believe, like, there's a legitimate reason for these back doors, and I'm sympathetic to their thoughts, but um, the technical reality is that it's not possible to do what they want to do, and you can't make it possible by wishing wishing hard enough, right?
Yeah, I think also another thing that, like, you didn't touch on there is also, like, the government's choosing what content is illegal and what content is allowed. And I think if we talk about, like, that first story where we talked about people making, like, criticisms of a person and they were finding that the government was planning to take action against them, I think having this, central authority of the government deciding what content is allowed and what content isn't is already kind of concerning, because that can be used against people to stifle speech, to you know, stop people from expressing their thoughts on things. And I think that sort of client side, scanning of people's devices is in a position to detect content that a government deems illegal, but it depends on what that government classifies as illegal. And I think we already kind of see this sort of stuff that happens in China, for instance, like content that they find reprehensible or like, you know, goes against what the government officials want people to share, they're able to stop that. So I don't think we should be really trying to copy what they're doing because that's not really uh, respecting people's right to free expression and privacy. But Kevin, did you have something you want to add here?
Oh yeah, of course. I also want to keep in mind as well is that child control is not going away anytime soon, unfortunately. Um, Going along with the Danish justice minister's like quote to the press, Denmark is still planning to go ahead with an October 14th vote. They're still pushing ahead despite the fact that they're almost defeated. Unfortunately, according to www.fightchildcontrol.eu, the website maintained by the campaigners that are going against this regulation, Germany can no longer be considered as fully opposed to child control. There, we initially thought that they have opposed it and they had came out with a statement. However, they have decided to remain undecided and currently like writing up proposals to what I believe to be like a compromise deal between the privacy advocates and, of course, the folks concerned about the spread of CSAM. Um, whether or not this proposal is actually going to work at all, I have no idea. And personally, I don't think so. Um, However, I want to keep in mind that if you do live in Germany or know folks that are based in Germany, please consider like contacting the MEPs in the EU website. We will soon like send that in the chat. Um, please make sure that the German members of European Parliament are aware that this must be stopped at all costs. There can't be any compromise deal per se. Encryption isn't something that you can just meet in the middle. Once it's broken, it's just broken. Um, but yeah, like it's still a very serious issue, and we're not anywhere closer towards like a full defeat of chat control for the how many years it has been proposed? Like 3, 4 years?
Yeah, it keeps coming back.
They need to kill it completely, but yeah, keeps coming back, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think it's good to keep an eye on chat control. I mean, we've been saying this every week now because all these deadlines are coming up, and it's important to keep an eye on it because, like you said, Germany is now undecided again, and probably will go forward with it. We'll have to see what they say, but at the end of the day, there isn't really a solution that works. Um, when it comes to all this client-side scanning stuff, and it really is an unprecedented law. It doesn't make a lot of sense on the face of it, like why the devices that you own should be reporting you to the government. We're moving a bit beyond back doors with this chat control thing and going into like a situation where I don't know. If we go back to the letter analogy, it's like your pen reporting on you to the government because of like what you wrote with it, right? It's not even they're not even trying to intercept it in between anymore. They just want all of the things around you to kind of tattle on you basically and create this surveillance state. And chat control is dangerous because like as Jordan mentioned earlier too, um y- at the end of the day, these client-side scanning services and all of the chats that are being read by platforms, what they're basing that on is basically what the government deems to be unacceptable speech, which can change depending on where you are and depending on the year and depending on a ton of different factors. It's not set in stone, and we're giving a lot of power um, to these government entities, which we've always known can't be entrusted to patrol speech. It's why, like in the US, for example, freedom of speech has always been so important. It was the very first amendment from the beginning of this country because we knew that there wasn't, and we knew at the time that there wasn't an acceptable time for the government to have this power over speech. And we're kind of letting go of that over time, and I think it's dangerous. And I think the rest of the world is also going in a similar anti-free speech direction. And so it's not a great situation anywhere.
I guess with that being said, we can kind of move on to the next article here. Do you want to take that one, Kevin?
I will, I will. So this article is from Ars Technica, and the headline is ChatGPT may soon require ID verification from adults, CEO says. This chatbot will default to the under 18 experience when age is uncertain after teen suicide lawsuit. Now, obviously, this is a very grim and very sad story. I think it kind of shows how widespread AI is, or rather LLMs are within our day-to-day lives, especially like our children, people our age. Um, on Tuesday, OpenAI announced plans to develop an automated age prediction system that will determine whether ChatGPT users are over or under 18, automatically directing younger users to a restricted version of the AI chatbot. The company also confirmed that parental controls will launch by the end of September. In a companion blog post, OpenAI CEO Sam Altman acknowledged, funny enough, that the company is, still prioritizing safety ahead of privacy and freedom for teens, even though it means that adults may eventually need to verify their age to use a more unrestricted version of the service, quote unquote. In some cases or countries who may still ask for an ID, we know this is a privacy compromise for adults, but believe it is a worthy trade-off. He admitted that it's not everyone would agree with how we are resolving a conflict between user privacy and teen safety. The announcement arrives weeks after a lawsuit filed by parents whose 16-year-old son died by suicide following extensive interactions with ChatGPT. According to the lawsuit, the chatbot provided detailed instructions, romanticized suicide methods, and discouraged the teen from seeking help from his family while the OpenAI system tracked 377 messages flagged for self-harm content without intervening. The proposed age prediction system represents a non-trivial technical undertaking for OpenAI, and whether AI-powered age detection can actually work remains a significant open question. Whether or not the system can actually identify users under 18, whether OpenAI can actually, automatically route the user to like a modified experience that blocks, adult content, and other like restrictions. They say they will take a safer route when uncertain about users' age, which could potentially lead to a worse user experience for adults who are using the service and causing them to verify their age through a formal ID process. Firstly, I have a lot of opinions on this. First, age verification is a plague. It's spreading across the world. I don't know what happened in the past few months, but it has skyrocketing popularity. While I do feel a lot of pain and sorrow for the parents who filed a lawsuit initially, there's still like a lot of ways where this could be resolved without necessarily leading to age verification. For example, perhaps actually responding to a 377 messages flagged and intervening. It doesn't particularly make sense because I feel like regardless of your age, I feel like if you are actively discussing suicide attempts or uh, kind of falling within the whole AI delusion that's happening lately with some folks, it doesn't particularly make sense to not build a system for intervention rather than assuming that okay, only adults can talk about these topics. Children can't, because frankly, it's an issue for everyone if whoever who may use AI. So instead of violating our basic privacy rights by enforcing age verification and potential ID collection, um, I just don't get why OpenAI can just simply be a better platform for everyone involved. Um, at the end of the day, verifying someone through their ID online or using age inference software to unreliably infer someone's age is incredibly invasive and could lead to a lot of risks, especially towards folks who do want to have a private experience when using LLMs. That's why we don't usually recommend folks to even use ChatGPT in the first place or any other online LLM. Obviously, AI isn't ideal. There's a lot of issues with it. I'm sure a lot of my fellow co-hosts also definitely disagree on AI, generally speaking, out of principle. But if you ever do need to use AI, definitely consider either self-hosting it, if you have the system resources and money, but maybe sparingly, very sparingly, like use like an online like wrapper that claims to be private, such as the ones offered by Protocol Lumo or um, maybe even doxxed. But then again, like this is not our official recommendation. If you do need to use sensitive content, please do not use anything online. Either self-host it or don't use AI at all. But I'm really curious to see what anyone else has to think about this whole situation because it seems quite grim and sad.
Yeah, I mean, all of this stuff is unfortunate. I think listeners, if you want like all of my opinions on this, you'll have to go back a few episodes and listen to what we talked about when YouTube did a very similar thing where they basically said we're going to be guessing your age based on what you do on the platform, and then we'll verify your ID if you want to appeal or in special circumstances. It seems like ChatGPT wants to take a similar approach where they are going to kind of guess how old you are. And then require an ID if not. I know that this article says that they don't specify how they're gonna verify your age or how they're gonna collect your ID. Maybe they'll use a third party service, but there aren't any private services right now. I think it's also possible they'll try to build their own ID verification service knowing OpenAI, and of course, it's no surprise that they would be in favor of age verification at that point because that's more data for them to collect, and I think that data is, the most valuable thing to an AI company right now, and they just need to get it through any way possible, so it wouldn't surprise me if this is kind of an excuse to, just know even more about their users and ingest all of that data for their large language models and other stuff that they're working on. Um So yeah, it's all the general age verification stuff on my end though. Did you have anything specific you wanted to add, Jordan?
Yeah, I think there's something specific that neither of you've talked about, which I think is kind of an interesting idea, right? So, kind of pivoting to uh, a different area here, I see a lot of these companies are like releasing like children version of their services. And I think specifically when it comes to like tools that people use for like work and like getting tasks done, I think one like specific company that I can think of that has been pretty insidious with doing this is like Microsoft and like Adobe. They kind of want to like get their fingers in early to kids to make sure that they have like dependence on their software. So when they become like older and they work in a professional environment, they're kind of dependent on that sort of software and implementation to get work done. And I think that is sort of what we're seeing here with like ChatGPT. Like they want to be able to have it so that children can use their services, or like they can have, you know, um, a version that is safer for kids, but to be able to get that sort of early connection to their service so that they're sort of dependent on that. And I think we're kind of seeing like that's going to sort of become a little bit of a problem later on when people need to do things, but they are reliant on these AI chat services for a lot of their tasks. That's kind of what I was thinking. Definitely a different angle than what either of you were talking about, but
Yeah, no, that is a really good angle though. It's funny because I was just talking to somebody about this problem, I think, in the classrooms, not with AI in particular, but kind of like what you were saying with Adobe and Microsoft. And I don't know how widespread this is where you are, but at least in the US, Microsoft is mostly out of the classrooms and it's mostly like Google Classroom and Google Workspace now. But they're trying to do the same thing where they can provide all of these services to children and to schools for free to kind of hook them early and hopefully they'll be users for the rest of their lives. And so I think that could certainly be a goal. I think that's a goal of OpenAI in general, is to kind of get everyone to outsource their thinking to OpenAI, and I can definitely agree that it would make a lot of sense as a strategy for them to uh, make their service more accessible to children for that reason. I think that it's a huge problem. I was just talking about with a former teacher of mine too, about how the classroom is just so different these days, and we're really just throwing these content consumption and entertainment devices in front of children, and we're not really teaching them any computer skills or technical skills. We're going in, like, assuming that every student is a computer wizard just because they grew up using TikTok, but consuming content on the internet doesn't translate to, like, real world skills that schools need to be building, and I think that is really overlooked, and a lot of people assume that, like, the current generation of children growing up right now is the most technically competent ever because they've been so immersed in this, but they haven't been immersed in, like, what makes any of this work. Um, I don't know, it's it's like I think the analogy I used was it's like sitting your kid in front of, Saturday morning cartoons for their whole life and then expecting them to become an animator, right? Where, like, consuming this content doesn't really translate to, these career skills and any educational value. Um and AI certainly is not helping with that, so I totally agree. It's not great.
It's kind of
Kev
like
yeah.
it's kind of like I would say, you know, I remember like there was like a study where apparently millennials are probably one of the most like technically like advanced like generation, or at least not necessarily millennials, but the folks who actually do remember a time before cell phones and had to like use Internet Explorer, and then the teachers would actively promote, hey, this is how you find resources. This is where how to cite your sources. This is how you write an essay, and I feel like Generation Z right now we just don't have that anymore. We just search things up on TikTok, at least before the rise of ChatGPT and all that. And nowadays, though, like in college, like I've noticed, like half my classroom, like after 2022, like acing all of their exams. When I remember, like when I was taking like a basic computer science class, it was the worst experience of my life. And then nowadays, like, it's so easy, and you can do it. All the homework assignments and all the presses just kind of gave up. There isn't really a way to prevent, all this academic integrity violation. So we're seeing the rise of AI, AI policies where professors are actually allowing it for essays and homework assignments, which is terrifying, honestly. Um, well, I'll be honest with you, as a student, I definitely realized that my education was not the best way, um, you know, to go forward. If when comparing a world without AI and a world with AI, like I wish I really missed out on a lot of these things because of it. And I'm sad that with the direction ChatGPT is going, having a kids edition, and teaching them young, it's kind of like a entire generation of kids who won't know how to critically think for themselves, and it just seems depressing to me almost. But I don't know, like it's. I really hope that like safety isn't used as a way for these companies to hammer their way towards like total complete dominance, like like trying to like establish a monopoly over, let's say, a certain potential like segmentation. There's an opening for AI to gear towards children. Obviously, companies will take it, but I'm just sad that safety is being used as an excuse to do so because it's clearly horrible and morally bankrupt. But it's using another moral issue to like justify it, which pleases me, I'd say.
Yeah, I think we're definitely going to get into a lot of like stuff about age verification later in the stream because we do have quite a lot of like discussion about that in the thread leading up to this stream. But I guess one kind of thing that like I don't know, I guess I'll like this is sort of maybe a controversial opinion, but I think like we're seeing like a lot of learning institutions trying to find like a different way to teach now because like a lot of the traditional methods of like, write up an essay. Well, it's a little bit more difficult now because people just use like ChatGPT to like help them write it, and it's a lot easier to do that now. And I think we're sort of getting to that point where like AI, I guess large language model detection is not that great. It's not perfect at detecting like AI generated content, which is sort of becoming a problem for lots of like learning institutions. So I definitely think there needs to be a sort of shift to a different style of learning than we've previously done, which is sort of, setting people assignments and sort of that sort of stuff. To something a bit more practical. I'm not sure how that will work. I'm not like an educator or anything, but that's sort of what my feeling is from being recently in university and also school. So that's sort of what I would say.
I think you're right on the money with that. I mean, I I have a lot of opinions about this, and I actually worked in a middle school a few years ago, and I worked there for a while, and of course, I'm not that old, so I remember my own school experience, and I think that it is very different. Now, and I think that there are a lot of problems, and the schools are kind of losing their way thanks to technology. I think a large part of it is like technology is just has never been super well understood. But there's a lot of like weird incentives in the school system to focus on things that don't really matter instead of student outcomes, and I don't see a lot of incentive to change that. Like it doesn't really matter how good all of these tools get if you're not teaching the basics in terms of research and in critical thinking. Um, it's yeah, it could be a whole separate podcast just talking about like things that I would do differently in the school system. But I do think that some change needs to happen, and I think that people are focused on the wrong thing. And I think like there's just too much I think there's far too much reliance on technology in general, especially in the schools, but in society at large. I think people, are becoming too dependent on, uh, getting other people online or getting AI online to do a lot of work for them, and it is massively degrading skills. So it's not a great situation, I don't think.
Yeah, I think I did see like a study that they did about like how people that relied on AI had their primary like cognitive abilities like degrade over time, like because they're basically outsourcing their brain to another company.
Right.
So yeah, it's definitely having an impact on people's skills. I know one specific industry is like kind of getting really, really it's becoming a problem is software development, because now we're seeing all these like sort of AI like coding things like Cursor and like GitHub Copilot. I know they're not that great right now, but like at like a point it is sort of becoming, people are relying on these tools quite a lot for like doing stuff, and I definitely don't think it's having a as positive outcome as all these like, Silicon Valley tech bros might have you believe. But yeah, that I don't know. I'm definitely sort of a little bit opposed to the whole AI thing. But that's sort of that's all I wanted to add there.
Yeah. I mean, I totally think the entire business model of, I think big tech in general is to kind of take away things that you already do and then eventually sell you a subscription service to get them back. Which we see, I mean, we've seen it from, that's pretty much what every big tech company does. Uber did it, taxis. They're uh, AI's doing it to thinking. I mean, I just think I think we need to generally value self-reliance a bit more instead of just taking the most convenient approach to things, because you give up so much control and so much power over your own life, um, with you kind of just operating at the whims of all of these companies selling your life to you for a few dollars a month at a time, right? Uh, yeah.
I guess with that being said, we've kind of talked about this for a little while here. I guess we can start moving into the Q&A section. So we've definitely had quite a lot of discussion on the forum so far, and we've also had, I think we might have had 1 or 2 questions in the YouTube chat too. So who wants to take the first question here?
I should actually pull up the forum thread. Let me take.
All right, let's have a quick look at the forum
uh,
thread. Yeah.
Kevin, have you seen any?
There is quite a lot of activity I'm checking through right now. So, all right, got it. So, um, uh, is part of this merged? I don't think so. Okay. So Phoenix asks, who in your mind should decide what malice is? How do you suppose free speech should be untouchable while malice and spam wouldn't be? Um, good question. This might get into philosophy a bit, which would be out of scope. I'd say at its core definition, malice means um, with ill intention or with the purpose of causing harm. Um, and at least in the United States, under the First Amendment, free speech is not protected only when there is a direct incitement to violence. For example, um, I'm allowed to, for example, say things that may hurt someone's feelings, but I'm not allowed to yell out fire in a movie theater. That would be a criminal offense. Um, so I guess like with malice and spam, as you may say, like just definitely like still a lot of harm and direct harm attributed to it. You know, death threats or malicious scams, like that are currently like spread to like met to a countless amount of people throughout the internet. Um, that of course is illegal activity and can usually be tied to some form of other legal activity as well. While a clear definition of free speech would be simply words that may hurt your feelings, but might not necessarily cause you physical harm or lead to some form of crime. At least that's what I learned when taking like a class on like cyber law and how it kind of intersects with the First Amendment. But I was wondering if anyone else here has a like better definitions than what I just said because it has been quite some time.
Yeah, I think it definitely ties a lot into like what we were talking about in the first news topic, where um at the end of the day, we I think the biggest goal in kind of to answer like who should decide this part of the question, rather than the definition, I think that we can't entrust the government to decide. It is kind of the main point that I would make here, regardless of your definition of what speech you like or you don't, or what should be allowed or not. That isn't something that should be wielded when it comes to just sharing information and speech online or anywhere. That isn't something that should be controlled by the government. It gives them too much power. They obviously have a lot of power over your life, and you need to balance that out by having and retaining rights. And I think the right to freedom of speech is an extremely important one. And there just aren't really circumstances where they should be stepping in. And of course, there already are some situations where they do step in, like ones that you brought up, for example, which you can definitely debate whether they should be even doing that and regulating hate speech. There's definitely a lot of opinions on both sides, but what we certainly shouldn't be doing is letting that slip even more into more broad categories of speech beyond that, and whether that should be allowed. It just we're giving up too much power, I think, when we entrust the government to use in any form, and we should be against that.
Yeah, I think this was like sort of a discussion around like um what like this person Phoenix, I think, was trying to respond to this person who made like a comment about like why are people mad about like people having their speech restricted, why are people mad about having to require their ID to access like social media and stuff. um but like we already kind of talked about, like when this sort of stuff happens, when people have their ID or their real name connected to an account, it does sort of chill free speech, especially when the government is in a position where they seem like they want to take actions against people that say things that they don't like, which we did see. There was some people in the government who were saying that people should be deported or they should have their ability to use social media restricted forever for their entire life. So I think once we open the gate to like requiring ID to access things, um, then that sort of just allows for this thing to happen. Um, so I think, there's definitely more of a discussion to be had about like age verification systems, because I know there was some people in this thread that were discussing like private alternatives and such. So I guess we could kind of move on to like another question that somebody had here. But it's kind of gotten quite a long thread here. Okay, so there's this post from Terrence in this forum thread, and I don't really want to read the entire thing because I feel like it's quite long, but I'll give like a kind of a summary, I guess. Basically, they have like an age verification solution proposal. They want to develop like an open source hardware token, like similar to a YubiKey that they use for like age verification. And they need to be, activated with an age verification key. So then, yeah, that sort of thing will need to be set up every time you buy a new device. And I think the main issue that I see with this sort of setup is those keys will have some sort of serial, they'll have some sort of connection back to somebody's identity. And I think once you start tying things to people's identity or like to a specific fixed identifier, it becomes sort of an issue, because that can be tied back to someone's identity.
Well, Uh, this whole thread kind of got a bit off the rails because it turned into a discussion instead of just questions. I know that a lot of this was brought up in a different discussion thread, that's still actively being discussed on the forum. And so I was planning on responding to a lot of that in the future when I had a chance to read it, because he obviously did write a lot. But I think the core point with this age verification stuff, I think a lot of like there are a lot of proponents even in the privacy community of these zero knowledge proof solutions, or like ways that age verification could technically be done without sharing identifiable information. And it's definitely possible on a technical level to build some of these systems where devices can attest to your age without identifying you or fingerprinting you in any meaningful way. So to get that out of the way, like these solutions right now, they're not being used widely. Right now, the solutions are to just upload your ID, an image of it, and have someone check it, which is obviously not good. And a zero knowledge proof solution would be better. But what that doesn't resolve, and what no age verification system really can resolve, is uh, the core issue of censorship that comes with all of these age verification schemes. Because even in a scenario where you have these private tokens that uh, can authenticate you or can authenticate your age, those tokens have to be issued by someone. And typically, they have to be issued I mean, they'd have to be issued by your government because who else will the government trust enough to verify people's ages? And so that does mean um, there is some level of mandatory registration with your government in order to obtain those tokens. And it also means that the government can control whether you can obtain those private tokens in the first place. And so for people who they want to censor, or for people who they want to like not allow access to certain information or not allow access to the internet, they can simply not issue those tokens, or they can highly limit how they can be used or shared, or how many they get, or all this sort of stuff, because ultimately the government will have to be the final authority on whether you can access that site or not. So the authentication between you and the site itself, it is important, and it's a privacy concern if these laws come to pass, because right now the solution with uploading your ID is just going to lead to cyber criminals and scammers and data breaches leaking all of your personal information. So if you're in the UK right now, where this already exists, you're in a very dangerous situation because you are extremely at risk every time you upload your ID. But even if we move to these more private technical solutions, um, this issue of censorship remains, and it's unavoidable by virtue of having the government, control both what content is locked behind these age verification walls, and also they can control whether you're allowed to bypass it by issuing you an ID or a token. Um, it really ties into a lot of the issues that people have. I know it's a hot topic right now in the US about like voter ID laws, for example, where you know you can't give the government the ability to disenfranchise people from voting for the government kind of at a whim, because it's challenging, or it's challenging in some situations to obtain an ID, for better or for worse, for some people. I can't really speak to their particular situation, but it happens, and it'll be the exact same thing here, where the government will or can make it very challenging to uh, verify your age and get access to this information. And the benefits compared to that drawback are extremely not clear. The downsides that require age verification in the first place, I don't think have really been conclusively proven. Like there's no evidence for a need for the system to exist, and all of these, children safety stuff. People much smarter than I have been thinking about trust and safety, and safety for children on the internet for decades, and they pretty much unanimously agree that, well, the current state of things is not perfect right now. We can't really impose technical or governmental regulations to solve them. They need to be solved somewhere else. Um, so yeah, that's the main concern with age verification that I have, that isn't solved by any technical scheme. And that's what I would say to the people who are proponents for those zero knowledge proof systems. With that said, was there something you wanted to add to that, Kevin?
Oh no, I think we can move on to the next question. I feel like both
I
of
did
you like.
actually want to add something there.
Oh, yeah, never mind.
Sorry. I guess like going back to like what Jonah said about like sort of like governments choosing to restrict certain content. Like this isn't like some sort of like boogeyman, like, sort of thing that has never happened before. This is, like, sort of already happening. There's sort of age restrictions being applied to content that is not should not be restricted to children. Like, I think I saw like a law that was being passed in Michigan, I believe, and it like sort of it banned access to content about VPNs, it banned content access to ASMR content, it restricted content that depicted transgender people. I mean, this is what happens when you sort of give this sort of control to a central authority here, where like the government. And I think even if we did have zero knowledge proofs to access that content, right? Um, that content is being restricted, and it's being wrongfully restricted because it's obviously content related to VPNs shouldn't be restricted because that's like a tool that people can use to access for legitimate purposes, right? And it's basically the government deciding that's not something we want people to access, not something we want people to be able to access freely without providing their ID. And as it stands right now, there's no solution that I'm aware of that's been implemented that actually utilizes zero knowledge proofs currently. So like this is sort of a pipe dream. And I think if there's one thing we know about like governments and like corporations is they never agree on anything. And I think it's kind of going to be pretty obvious that like none of them are all going to it's very unlikely that they're all going to be like, oh, of course, we're all gonna adopt zero knowledge proofs. I don't think that's going to happen. I think there's still going to be very much like no single standardized way for this to be implemented, and it's going to remain fragmented the way it is now, with like some platforms doing face scans, some platforms are just straight up requiring ID. So
I do think, only speaking for the US, and for better or for worse, but for people who are interested in this zero knowledge proof solution, to me, it does seem like websites and companies in the US will adopt a single solution, and it's going to be the solution that Apple and Google are developing in their wallet software, where you can have a digital ID. The reason I think that is because recently in iOS 26, they just added US government support to add like a digital ID on a federal level based on your passport, and I think that existing will be the excuse that US lawmakers use to, introduce age verification widely in the US compared to where it is now. Um, that is technically a zero knowledge proof solution where websites can, uh, potentially, like, ask your Apple Wallet to, verify your age without receiving any of the ID information. So there is that benefit, for better or for worse, in the US, and I think that because the US government is now officially adopting this, it's not available yet, but it's coming soon. I think that that will be the tool that they use to do it. I have not seen a lot of uptake for this in other countries. I think I don't know what countries use it. I know Japan does, and I think there's one or two more, but I think most countries have not adopted this, and I don't know if they'll go in that direction. It does seem like the countries who have already introduced this, like the UK, don't seem to really care about security at all, so they're gonna be in a worse position. But even in the US, with this problem, I mean, with this solution, it has all of the problems that uh, I was talking about before, where the US government is ultimately, going to use this as a tool to prevent some people from accessing information, or uh, to kind of just make it more inconvenient to access things that they don't like. I think that the digital ID thing also ties into the real name policies from before, because once this technology exists, it can be used by websites to request more information than just your age from your ID. And we'll see how these wallet developers and like I'm sure Apple, knowing them and how they handle app permissions right now, they probably won't allow any website to request sensitive information like your name or your photo, but I'm sure you can pay them $100 and send them a letter and say, "Hey, I need to request this for my very important website. I need their full real names," and websites will be able to request that, and that's all built into this specification where you can share pretty much everything on your ID. And there'll be a consent screen, so you'll see what you're sharing. You won't be caught by surprise, but it won't be a true consent situation because the options you'll be faced with are, give us all of your information or don't use the app. And so I think a lot of people will just give in and give out that information, and it'll just serve to really enforce these real name policies and prevent pseudonyms from being used on the internet going forward. So there's a lot of dangers even with this scheme and with zero knowledge schemes and with what Apple is planning in the US right now that I think people need to be aware of, even if it is, technically a better solution than like what's in the UK right now. Um it's not a good solution and it's not something that we should be allowing from the government.
I mean, I can talk from, like, I guess, an Australian perspective. I didn't actually know there was sort of progress to have a sort of standard be implemented, across the US, so that's good to
It
know.
was interesting because it was one of the highlight things in the iOS 26, like, like on their website, it gets a whole square. They really advertised it to the consumers, like, hey, you can add your passport now. But yeah, anyways.
Interesting. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
we don't actually have like, in Australia, like, we have sort of an app that allows you to add, like, your ID, nothing, like, integrated into any, like, sort of Google Wallet or Apple Wallet stuff, but I know that as far as I'm aware, like, there hasn't really been that much of a focus on, like, the privacy aspects of it, but I think the fact that, like, there's not really been a general consensus about which direction to go is kind of already a bit concerning. Like we're seeing with at least across the US, there seems to be some consensus, which is good, I guess. But that's one country out of like a lot of countries. So yeah, it's just kind of unfortunate stuff. I don't really have anything extra to add here. Um, so if anyone wants to pick the next question, Kevin, did you see
Oh,
anything on the
yes.
forum thread?
Oh,
I'll
yeah, I
just
did.
note really quick a question from in the YouTube chat from I'm sorry, I'm gonna butcher your name. Tejas Chandrasekhar, maybe. Sorry. Um, they asked about whether we have recommendations for privacy-friendly uh, LLMs and AI on our site. And then I saw that they followed up and said that they saw it, but we do indeed have a category for AI chat. And I think AI image generation maybe. The only things that we're recommending in general are fully local ones that you can run on your own computer. We don't recommend any cloud providers, and I definitely wouldn't recommend even using um, privacy-focused ones like Duck AI or Proton Luma right now, personally, because at the end of the day, you're sharing a lot of potentially sensitive query information with those sites. It's not possible to fully end-to-end encrypt like your AI queries to a cloud service, so you're kind of relying on them not logging basically, which isn't a great position to be in, and I don't think that we should be. Um, it's kind of just anti-AI sentiment in general for me, though. I don't think we should be uh, giving gi like we were talking about earlier, offloading all of this stuff that we're doing to AI in general, so I don't think it's really worth it to use these cloud services, especially because they get so much information, and you're really relying on pinky promises, that Proton or DuckDuckGo isn't gonna, uh, like, spy on you or use that information in any way that you don't anticipate, which might be true now, but things can always change, and which is why we always our recommendations, we try and tie them to technical guarantees rather than these pinky promises from companies, wherever we can. And the reality is right now the only way to use AI privately is to use it fully locally. So those are the solutions that we recommend. I know they're not accessible to everyone, but I don't think that I would recommend using any of these even privacy-based cloud services, if you're not able to run one locally. I think it's not worth it.
Yeah. As
Definitely,
for
I
like
agree.
the four,
I think you're muted, Kevin.
oh, sorry. Yeah, I was trying to unmute myself for the past like few minutes. I don't know what's going on. Um, but yeah, Jordan, do you want to finish your comment before I move on to the next question?
I didn't have anything to add. I just saw that you were speaking, but it wasn't coming through. So no worries.
Okay, yeah, no worries. Yeah, one next question on the forum belongs to Air Work, and they said, I got a question. What's Privacy Guide's official view on who deserves access to privacy, particularly for oppressed and marginalized groups like Indigenous peoples, Black and Brown communities, women, unhoused folks, undocumented immigrants, LGBTIA plus folks, the youth, and others? Um, just to quickly answer that, we believe that everyone deserves privacy, and the right to it specifically. If there is an exception, it'll probably be a watchdog role for certain government employees, for the sake of transparency, of course. Um, but I think if there's anything else to add by the others, I'm more than happy to hear it as well.
I think that's a good point to bring up. Kind of the stance that we've taken is that privacy is a human right, of course, and we believe that all people should have it in their personal lives, certainly. Of course, when you're trusting other people, there is a trust factor. So I would agree that like from governments and government officials in their official capacity, there should be more transparency. It's also why, for example, in our VPN criteria, we require that VPN companies have public leadership, and so you like know where they're based and who's behind them, because potentially uh, you would want to go after them if they misuse your data or something. It is important in some cases, especially with companies, to stake your reputation behind the product that you're putting out and really be transparent. And so I definitely think it makes a lot of sense for the companies and people that you're trusting, and who are actually like providing a service based on their reputation, to be as transparent as possible. But when it comes to people personally, absolutely, like, the right to privacy is an absolute thing. It kind of ties into a question that we get sometimes, which is, like, I think a lot of p not everyone on the team, but a lot of people who volunteer, who work here at Privacy Guides, share, like, their name and, in some cases, their photo. Like, I'm obviously on video here, right? And people ask me, "Why do you do that? If you care so much about privacy, why are you doing this under your real name?" And it is kind of because, like, I'm not trying to hide the information I'm putting out, I'm trying to get as many people, as interested in privacy as possible, and to kind of stake, um, myself personally and my reputation behind the work that I'm doing here, I think really lends to the credibility, of privacy guys in general, um, and it makes a difference. So that's why, we lean towards transparency from companies and organizations in general, but, full privacy for people who aren't putting stuff out there, basically.
100%, I agree, with all of that. I think, yeah, it doesn't really matter who you are. Privacy extends to everybody, and
Yeah.
sometimes people think there's some sort of distinction that needs to be made, and no, that's not the case.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think being transparent is incredibly important, and it definitely matters, especially like an organization like Privacy Guides. Like we want to make sure we're transparent and we're, um, you know, being open to everything. And I think especially when you're trusting a resource like this, it needs to be sort of transparent how it's run and how everything is working. And I think the same thing goes for every other service that you trust. So like, products that we recommend or like anything like that, it applies the same way. Um, but yeah, I don't really have anything more to add there.
Well, I'll grab another question from formerly Hello Echo on the forum. They ask, could the potential requirement for ID verification on ChatGPT affect third-party wrappers like Duck.ai? Kind of tying into one of our previous stories. Again, I would reiterate that I wouldn't use these third-party wrappers personally. I don't think that they provide the privacy guarantees that you kind of need for a tool like this. Whether it will affect them or not is an interesting question, though. It's hard to say, really. It kind of depends on how big these third-party wrappers get, but it seems like it would be very technically challenging for OpenAI to restrict that on their API, because they'd need to somehow differentiate between different DuckDuckGo users, which is probably information that they're not getting or could request from DuckDuckGo. So it seems infeasible, but I mean, maybe they will restrict their API in the future. I haven't seen that mentioned in any of these news stories about ID verification, whether that will affect their API or just the ChatGPT app itself. I'm guessing I'm guessing it's just the ChatGPT app and not like OpenAI's business services that will be affected, at least for now.
Yeah, it's definitely like sort of an evolving thing. I'm pretty sure then it's not something they're implementing immediately, is it? It's something that they're planning on adding. So we'll definitely keep you updated on that if you want to um, stay up to date on that sort of stuff. I'm seeing another question here on the forum from Tropics8997. And they ask, if I'm at a public area like a library or coffee shop, is it better to use public Wi-Fi or tether from a phone? They've also got another few questions here, but I would say from a security perspective, tethering your phone would be better, and tethering your phone using a USB would be even better because that's closing the reducing the attack surface, I guess. But I think as soon as you like join an untrusted network, like a public one like that, there is risks of, there's always risks of security issues. But I think, if it depends on what's available, because I know some places don't have perfect cellular reception. So if there's no reception and there's only public Wi-Fi available, you kind of have to make the compromise. And I know some people also don't have unlimited data. That is sort of an American thing, having unlimited data plans. That's definitely not the case in Europe and I guess in Australia and New Zealand. So it depends on what your use case is, but if the worst comes to worst, like obviously using a VPN can definitely offer a layer of protection there on a public Wi-Fi network. But I would say try and avoid it if you can. I don't know if anyone else has any other tips there for that first question.
Yeah, I think that's definitely like the situation where it makes the most sense to use a VPN. As far as our recommendations go, we generally recommend using a VPN anyways, and that's going to protect you from a lot of stuff. You're already protected from like man-in-the-middle attacks on these private networks, which used to be a much bigger problem because of just HTTPS now. So it's not like it's not going to be easy for like someone else on the network to steal your bank credentials these days, even if you don't use the the environment there. But it is still true that people on the network can see a lot of metadata about what you're doing. They can see like what IPs and domains you're accessing and what DNS requests you're making. And so there is still danger to using these untrusted networks. And a VPN helps with a lot of that, and I would use a VPN, probably either way, either on the public Wi-Fi or when tethering to your phone. It generally makes sense to
Yeah, I
use it
think also
broadly.
another thing that's kind of important on like a public network, a lot of times they have blocks on certain content or accessing certain ports and such. That's definitely a problem I've had personally. So definitely using a VPN also gives you that extra benefit when you're tunneling the network. When you're tunneling your network connection, it bypasses all those like sort of IP and port blocks. So that is definitely another thing to consider. Kevin, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yes, yes. One thing to add as well is that another option you could also do is have a hotspot with you, which you can like use that to connect to, let's say, a like Wi-Fi router, and that router being used for, let's say, has a VPN on it. So you use that for your phone and your laptop as well. If you feel like tethering to your phone is not necessarily the best idea for you if you don't have a good data plan. So potentially, like a cloud router could help you a lot.
Yeah, good stuff. That is definitely something you could choose to do. And then I guess moving on to the next question that this person had. Another question I have is the security issues of Debian even real issues at this point. I think Flatpaks and Snaps solve these issues. Also, security-focused distros like Kick Secure are based off Debian. I assume this is ultimately a threat modeling question. So basically there is like, if you check on the Privacy Guide's website, there is like a section about like Linux generally, and there is a section there that talks about like stable distros versus rolling releases. And generally the reason why we focus more on recommending like rolling releases, or I guess in the case of Fedora, which is a semi-rolling, is that core like packages are held back, core versions of packages are held back each version. So for example, in Debian Trixie, it's basically they hold all the versions at a certain point and they only backport security patches to those packages. So that's kind of a problem because a lot of times there's not always like the team available to backport all of those security fixes, and sometimes they don't actually get backported at all. So that's kind of why we do recommend using like a rolling release, or in the case of Fedora or Fedora-based distros, that's like semi-rolling. So I think with Fedora, like just the GNOME like packages are held back, and then they update that every single release. So that's the benefit of using like a rolling release, and I guess that's sort of the security issue is packages are held back and those fixes aren't backported properly. And also they use like Firefox ESR and Chromium ESR. So those are, again, the same idea. They're like extended release versions and the fixes for those browsers are backported. So I think you should be definitely careful about like using an ESR release. But I'm not sure if that's the biggest issue. I think the main thing would be the package versions themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. And they mentioned Flatpaks and snaps, and I don't think that the solves the issue adequately. It just doesn't make a lot of sense on desktop. I feel like we get this question, it like comes up every couple years when Debian releases a new release because people use it and they're like, oh wow, everything is so shiny and new. Surely, it'll be this good forever. When in reality, it will get worse over time and you'll get far behind. It just happens to seem like a good idea because once again, everything on Debian is updated. But on a desktop environment, especially if you're browsing the web, you need to have the latest updates available, and you will not get that on a frozen system like this. It's only a matter of time before it causes problems, and backports or um, aren't a good solution. Snaps are mainly like led by Canonical, and it has a lot of privacy and centralization problems. So I wouldn't recommend that as a solution, even if it could solve some of those problems. And Flatpaks are still pretty far behind where they need to be to consider something like this. So I would definitely stick with the advice that we've published on Linux. I don't think anything has really changed recently that would change the recommendations we're putting out.
And I do think like Kick Secure is like in an interesting spot, right? Like they've got their own sort of thing going on, and I think that's definitely not the wrong approach, but it's definitely not the approach that like most security experts would recommend, at least when it regards to like packaged versions. Um, and we do recommend basically like Fedora semi-rolling or rolling. So I would stick with rolling or semi-rolling distro instead of sticking with like a stable release, because those are the problems with that. And then it says, lastly, are UEFI/BIOS updates even help all that much? It seems like vendors are not good with these updates and it's better just to install something like Core Boot. So they are actually pretty decent. It depends on who you buy it from, and it depends on the manufacturer, whether they actually do support things for a long time. Like specifically, I'm pretty familiar with Lenovo because I do like ThinkPads, and in my experience, if you buy like a brand new ThinkPad, it should get, firmware updates every couple of months. And the reason for that is because it's a business laptop and they have basically contracts with like companies to keep the firmware up to date and protected against vulnerabilities and such. So even I've got a ThinkPad that's like from 2017 and it regularly gets firmware updates still. So um, I would say business laptops are much more likely to be supported for the long run because they're often used at like a business for 5, 6 years. So it's definitely a better like thing. And whether that actually matters, I mean, there are vulnerabilities in people's BIOSes and such, but I don't know. I haven't really seen that much of a concern over that specifically, but I know there are like issues with firmware being vulnerable. But I can't really think of any specific issue. Kevin?
I do have one in mind. If you remember Spectre, which is like this proof of concept attack that affects a lot of the older Intel CPUs. Before a certain day, I don't remember this year, but essentially almost all Intel CPUs have this horrible like um, uh, vulnerability, and I believe that you know nowadays there has been like quite a lot of firmware updates that did patch this. But if you have an older device they haven't touched in years, it may still have it. So that's probably the one situation where, yes, you should probably uh, regularly update your BIOS if possible.
I did also see a comment in the YouTube live chat, and Anon said there's also Debian unstable. So the issue with Debian unstable is that it's not actually maintained by the standard Debian security team. So there are issues with like packages not being updated still. So same issue as before, doesn't have the standard security team like monitoring that and making sure that things are up to date. So I I just really think if you wanna choose something that's better, I honestly like Fedora, it uses like SE Linux by default, as far as I'm aware. Like Debian doesn't do that. So like there's sort of benefits. I don't think Debian is really like, I don't know. I'm not trying to say it's a bad distro, but when we look at like security and privacy, um, mainly security, it's not really the greatest for that aspect. Um, so yeah, unless there's anything else you guys want to say on that one.
I think we should probably see if there's one last question to do. Otherwise, we can wrap this up. Is there any? Do either of you have one question you want to pick? I don't know if I've seen any remaining.
Um, there's someone, this is probably a good question for you actually, Jonah. Is there a reason why you don't recommend pfSense CE?
Um, that is a good question. It's been discussed on our forum. We used to recommend pfSense and then we replaced it with OpenSense because it seemed like, I think the main reason was because it seemed like that was the way the community was going at the time. pfSense has some weird like approach to management and development that I don't know if I'd fully get behind, but at the same time, I do use pfSense personally, alongside OpenSense and other routers in different networks. And I don't really have an issue with it. And I don't know of any major issues with it besides how they were handling their like marketing approach to OpenSense a while ago. I think definitely check out the pfSense thread on the forum. You can search for it to find a bit more information because I don't fully remember all the details off the top of my head, but I don't think there's a lot negative about it from a technical perspective. So maybe we could consider re-adding it again. I think we've discussed it before, but there aren't a lot of pfSense users who have been demanding it, so it's not a very high priority for us to look at. I think that's typically how things go when something kind of popular isn't recommended. It's just, people haven't asked for it enough.
Yeah, and I also think it's worth checking out like OpenWRT as well, because that's another project that is recommended. And I don't know, I like it, so that's probably another option to look into as well if you want to check out that. Okay, let's see. Is there any other questions here? Do you see anything else just for our final question here, Kevin?
I don't see anything so far, I believe. I'm just double checking the form and it hasn't been any updates. Uh, yeah, like I think that's pretty much it, I would say. Like unless anyone else sees something.
Okay. Well, thank you, Kevin and Jordan, for hosting this. I think I'll wrap this up. I'll just share with you all of the updates from this show are going to be shared in a email newsletter on our website every week. So we're going to send out like links to this the news sources we talked about and other stuff from the show, and post that on our website soon, so you can subscribe by email on our website or with an RSS reader for whatever, if you want to stay tuned to all of that. Um, if you prefer audio, we're still working on getting like a dedicated podcast system set up. I know people have been asking why the latest episodes aren't in their podcast readers yet, and we're gonna have a solution for that soon. But the recording for this show is on PeerTube, or it will be on PeerTube shortly. So you can listen to it there. If you want to listen to it off of YouTube, it'll also be on our website. Um, Otherwise, we will be here again next week at the same time, so definitely check it out. Last call to action. If you do like the show and if you want to support Privacy Guides, definitely go to our website and consider becoming a member or donating. If you go to our website, you can click the red heart icon at the top right to send a donation or to become a member. If you click the email subscription button on every page, that will also give you the option to select a membership plan and get access to all of the stuff that I talked about at the beginning of the video. I have a whole thread in spiel on the forum about why this membership is so important. Maybe I'll get into it another time, but like it really does support all of the work that we're doing and all of the videos that Jordan's been putting out on this YouTube channel here, and all of the articles Em's been doing, and all of the work Kevin has been doing in our community. It really just makes a difference, and it's hugely important that if you find value from this service and you're able to donate, that you become a member and do so. So thank you very much for considering it, and thank you all for watching the show. I think that'll sign us off. Thanks again, Kevin and Jordan, for joining me, and we'll see you next week.
See you next week, everybody.
Bye, everyone.